You know what? I've been monitoring this backwater planet for 3 cycles now, and I thought I'd seen everything these bipedal maniacs could do. Boy, was I wrong. The name's Vex-Nine, by the way, senior xenobiologist for the Galactic Survey Corps. And if someone had told me 6 months ago that I'd be filing a report about humans voluntarily walking into what we've designated as Extinction Zone Alpha 7, I'd have recommended immediate psychiatric evaluation. But here we are. The rainforest in question sits on the continent they call South America, though why they name their landmasses after some dead explorer is beyond me. This particular stretch of green hell spans roughly 200,000 square kilometers, and every single species that's ever entered it has vanished without a trace. Not died, vanished. There's a difference, and trust me, you don't want to know what that difference is. We've got sensor readings showing gravitational anomalies, temporal distortions, and energy signatures that make our most advanced equipment throw error codes. The local fauna won't go within 50 kilometers of the place. Even the insects avoid it, which should tell you something, because insects are typically too stupid to recognize danger until it's dissolving their exoskeletons. So naturally, when the humans discovered this place, they immediately started planning expeditions. It's the find of the century. That was Dr. Marcus Thorne, expedition leader, and apparently the kind of human who thinks poking sleeping giants is a recreational activity. 42 years old, 3 PhDs, and the survival instincts of a concussed lemming. His team consisted of 5 other specimens of human brilliance: botanist Elena Vasquez, who specialized in cataloging plants that could kill you in 17 different ways; archaeologist James Wright, convinced he'd find some lost civilization; geologist Sarah Kim, obsessed with mineral formations that defied physics; tech specialist Alex Turner, whose equipment malfunctioned every time it got within 100 meters of the forest; and wildlife photographer Lisa Grant, documenting their march toward inevitable doom. The Brazilian government had cordoned off the area after 3 separate military units went missing in the 1980s. Big signs in Portuguese warning people to stay out, complete with skull symbols that even humans should understand. But did that stop our intrepid explorers? Of course not. They saw the warnings as a challenge. The indigenous tribes call it the place where thoughts go to die, Thorne explained to his team as they made final preparations at base camp. Fascinating, isn't it? Fascinating. That's like saying a black hole has interesting gravitational properties. But I'll give credit where it's due. Humans possess an almost supernatural ability to rationalize walking into obviously lethal situations. Day 1 of their expedition started normally enough, if you consider normal to include their GPS systems immediately failing, their satellite phones producing nothing but static, and their compasses spinning like drunken dancers at a wedding. Most species would take these as hints from the universe to maybe reconsider their life choices. Humans? They switched to paper maps and analog compasses. Just electromagnetic interference, Turner announced, his voice crackling over my surveillance equipment. Probably some mineral deposit affecting our electronics. Oh, sweet summer child, if only it were that simple. The forest itself looked innocent enough from the outside, your typical tropical rainforest with towering trees, dense undergrowth, and the kind of humidity that makes you question your life decisions. But I was monitoring it through quantum resonance imaging, and what I saw made my scales itch with unease. The trees weren't just growing, they were watching. Don't ask me how I know that after 30 years in this job you develop instincts about things that shouldn't be possible. By noon they'd penetrated about 5 kilometers into the green maze. That's when the first irregularity occurred. Did anyone else notice it got darker? Vasquez asked, her voice tight with the kind of tension that comes from being observed by something you can't see. She was right. The canopy above them had somehow grown thicker, blocking out the sun, despite the fact that satellite imagery from 30 minutes earlier showed clear spaces between the leaves. But here's the kicker: the trees hadn't moved. They'd simply rearranged themselves, like a cosmic game of chess, where the board reshuffles between moves. Trick of the light, Wright insisted, though he kept glancing upward with the expression of a man who realizes he might have made a terrible mistake. Dense canopy can play tricks on perception. Right, because that explains why their shadows were pointing in 3 different directions, despite there being only one light source. Grant was having a field day, snapping photos of everything. Her camera was one of those old-fashioned film models, the kind that doesn't rely on electronics. Smart girl. Too bad intelligence doesn't prevent stupidity when it's group-sanctioned. The biodiversity here is incredible, Vasquez exclaimed, examining a flower that was definitely not in any terrestrial botanical database. The bloom was iridescent purple with what looked like tiny eyes instead of pistils, and it tracked movement with the focused attention of a predator. This species appears to be entirely new to science. Oh, if she only knew what science was about to learn from her. By hour 6 they'd covered 12 kilometers, which was actually impressive considering the terrain. The jungle floor was a maze of roots, fallen logs and streams that seemed to flow uphill when nobody was looking directly at them. But humans have this peculiar talent for adapting to impossible situations. They just keep moving forward, adjusting to each new impossibility like it's the most natural thing in the world. That's when Kim noticed the rocks. These formations are unusual, she said, kneeling beside what looked like a perfectly geometric crystal formation jutting from the earth. The structure was roughly 2 meters tall, hexagonal, and hummed with a frequency that made the hair on my arms stand up from 3 light years away. The mineral composition doesn't match anything I've seen before. Turner approached with his equipment, trying to get readings. His instrument started smoking the moment he got within arm's reach of the formation. Definitely some kind of electromagnetic phenomenon. He muttered, apparently missing the irony that his scientific explanation had just burst into flames. But here's where it gets interesting. Instead of backing away from the clearly dangerous alien artifact, what did our human friends do? They gathered around it like moths to a flame. Classic human behavior, see something that can kill you, immediately want to touch it. Look at these markings, Wright said, running his fingers along symbols carved into the crystal's surface. The markings began to glow the moment he made contact. They're not like any ancient script I've encountered. That's because they weren't ancient, you magnificent fool. They were warning labels, in about 17 different dead languages. All saying the same thing, do not touch the forbidden knowledge crystal, you idiots. Okay, I'm paraphrasing, but that was the general sentiment. We should document this thoroughly, Thorne decided. This could revolutionize our understanding of pre-Columbian civilizations. Pre-Columbian? Try pre-existence of your solar system, but sure, let's go with the archaeological angle. It's not like the truth would be any less terrifying. They spent the rest of the afternoon examining the crystal formation, taking photos, measurements, and notes. Grant's camera started producing some fascinating results, images that showed the crystal from angles that shouldn't have been possible, perspectives that suggested the object existed in more dimensions than human perception could process. The depth of field in these shots is impossible, she murmured, flipping through her photographs. It's like the camera is seeing around corners, through time into parallel dimensions, tomato to tomato. As evening approached, they set up camp near the crystal formation, because of course they did. Why sleep somewhere safe when you can bed down next to an artifact that's probably broadcasting your location to every nightmare creature within 1,000 light years? I'm getting some unusual readings, Turner announced as darkness fell. His backup equipment, the kind that runs on batteries and doesn't rely on satellites, was showing energy fluctuations that painted pretty patterns on his screens. Electromagnetic activity is spiking as the sun sets. Electromagnetic activity. Sure, let's call it that instead of interdimensional gateway warming up for the evening shift. Dinner was a cheerful affair around their campfire. Freeze-dried rations, purified water, and the kind of conversation you have when you're convinced you're making scientific history instead of becoming a cautionary tale for future generations. Tomorrow we'll map the area more thoroughly, Thorne explained, consulting his paper maps. If there's one crystal formation, there might be others. This could be part of a larger complex. Oh, there were others. My sensors were detecting at least 47 similar formations scattered throughout the forest, all humming in perfect harmony, like some cosmic tuning fork designed to open doorways that should stay firmly shut. The local legends might have more basis, in fact, than we initially thought, Vasquez added. Plants responding to electromagnetic fields, unusual mineral formations. Indigenous peoples could have interpreted these phenomena through their cultural lens. Cultural lens. That's a polite way of saying they knew enough to stay the hell away from the murder forest. As night settled over their camp, the forest came alive with sounds that definitely weren't in any wildlife guide. Howls that seemed to come from multiple directions simultaneously, rustling in the canopy that suggested things moving through the trees in patterns too coordinated to be natural, and a low, thrumming vibration that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. Probably just unfamiliar wildlife, Kim said, though she kept her flashlight pointed into the darkness beyond their fire. Nocturnal species we haven't catalogued yet. A nocturnal species. Right, because that's a much more comforting explanation than things that exist in the spaces between reality are saying hello. Grant was still taking photographs, her flash illuminating the surrounding jungle in brief, stark bursts. Each photo revealed shapes moving just beyond the range of normal vision, shadows that didn't correspond to any visible objects, the forms that suggested intelligence and malevolent intent. The forest feels alive, she whispered, scrolling through her latest shots. Like it's watching us. Finally, someone with functioning survival instincts. Too bad it was about 12 hours too late. Just the effect of being in an unfamiliar environment, Wright assured her. Human psychology evolved to be hypervigilant in unknown situations. We're probably just anthropomorphizing natural phenomena. Anthropomorphizing. There's a 10-credit word for ignoring the obvious signs that something wants to eat your soul. But humans being humans, they eventually settled down for the night. Turner volunteered for first watch, equipped with night vision goggles and enough electronic gadgets to stock a small laboratory. The others crawled into their tents, apparently confident that nylon fabric would protect them from whatever was moving through the darkness just beyond their campfire's reach. That's when things started getting really interesting. At 11:47 p.m. local time, Turner's equipment registered what he described as massive electromagnetic pulse. Every piece of electronic gear in the camp, backup batteries, digital watches, emergency beacons, everything went dead simultaneously. Just a solar flare effect, he muttered, trying to restart his night vision equipment. Magnetic field fluctuations can cause widespread electronic failure. Solar flare. At night. During a solar minimum cycle. Sure, that makes perfect sense. But Turner was nothing if not resourceful. He switched to a simple flashlight and continued his watch, sweeping the beam across the tree line in regular patterns. For about 20 minutes, everything seemed normal. Well, as normal as camping next to an interdimensional beacon in a forest that shouldn't exist can be. Then the beam caught something. Standing at the very edge of the light, maybe 30 meters from camp, was a figure. Human-shaped, but wrong in ways that made Turner's brain struggle to process what he was seeing. Too tall, joints bending in directions that violated anatomy, and a face that seemed to shift and blur whenever he looked directly at it. "Hello?" Turner called out, his voice cracking with uncertainty. "Is someone there?" The figure didn't respond. It just stood there, watching him with eyes that reflected his flashlight beam like polished metal. For a long moment, man and thing stared at each other across the darkness. Then Turner made the absolutely brilliant decision to approach it. "Are you lost?" he asked, walking toward the tree line with his flashlight extended. "Do you need help?" The figure stepped backward as he advanced, maintaining the same distance between them. Always just at the edge of the light, always watching with that unblinking stare. Turner followed it for about 50 meters before he realized he could no longer see the campfire behind him. The forest had somehow rearranged itself again, closing ranks between him and safety. But being human, instead of panicking like any sensible species would, he just called out to his teammates. "Hey, I found someone. I think they might be injured." No response. His voice seemed to be absorbed by the trees, muffled and distorted until it sounded like he was shouting underwater. That's when Turner finally realized he might be in trouble. He turned back toward where he thought the camp should be, but the forest looked different now. The trees were taller, the undergrowth thicker, and paths that had been clear just minutes before were blocked by massive fallen logs that definitely hadn't been there earlier. "Guys?" he called, louder this time. "Can anyone hear me?" Silence. Complete, absolute silence. No insects, no night birds, no rustling leaves. Just the kind of quiet that presses against your eardrums like cotton wool soaked in dread. When he turned back to look for the mysterious figure, it was gone. But written in the dirt at his feet, in symbols that matched the ones carved into the crystal formation, was a message that his phone's translation app, if it had been working, would have rendered as "Welcome to the collection." Turner stood there in the darkness, flashlight beam wavering as his hand began to shake, finally understanding that he was no longer the observer in this situation. He had become the observed, the studied, the specimen. And somewhere in the distance, barely audible above the sound of his own panic breathing, he could hear the unmistakable sound of his teammates' voices calling his name. The only problem, the voices were coming from 6 different directions at once. Now, any reasonable species would assume Turner was dead. Game over. Evolution in action. Natural selection doing what it does best. But humans? Oh no, humans don't accept simple explanations like our friend got eaten by interdimensional forest monsters. They have to investigate. Back at camp, the remaining 5 team members woke to discover Turner missing and all their electronics mysteriously fried. Most species would pack up and leave immediately. Humans started organizing search parties. He probably fell into a ravine, Thorne announced with the confidence of someone who hadn't seen the terrain flatten itself into perfect geometric patterns overnight. "We need to establish search grids and work systematically." Search grids, in a forest that rearranges itself for entertainment. Sure, that'll work perfectly. Wright was examining Turner's abandoned equipment when he made an interesting discovery. "His notebook is still here, but look at this." He held up Turner's journal, open to the last entry. The handwriting started normal enough technical observations about electromagnetic readings, but halfway through, it devolved into symbols. The same symbols carved into the crystal formation. Maybe he was copying the markings, Kim suggested, though her voice carried that particular tone humans use when they're trying to convince themselves of something they don't actually believe. Maybe, or maybe something was already rewriting his thoughts before it decided to collect him properly. But hey, let's go with the optimistic interpretation. Vasquez was more concerned about the plant life around their campsite. Overnight, the vegetation had grown noticeably thicker, and several species that hadn't been there yesterday were now flourishing like they'd been established for decades. "This growth rate is impossible," she muttered, measuring stems that had apparently gained 30 centimeters in 8 hours. Even with optimal conditions, these plants would need weeks to achieve this kind of development. Impossible. There's that word again. Humans love using it right before accepting whatever impossibility is staring them in the face. Grant was documenting everything with her film camera, which was still functioning perfectly despite last night's electronic apocalypse. Her photographs from the previous day were revealing some fascinating details in the developing light. The crystal formation appeared different in every shot, showing angles and surfaces that shifted depending on the viewing perspective. "It's like the structure exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously," she said, comparing images. "The camera is capturing aspects our eyes can't perceive directly." Finally, someone was starting to grasp the scope of what they were dealing with. Too bad understanding and survival aren't the same thing. They decided to split into 2 groups for the search, because obviously dividing their forces in a hostile environment was the most logical tactical decision. Thorne and Wright would head north, following what appeared to be Turner's trail, while Kim, Vasquez and Grant would search the southern perimeter. Stay in radio contact, Thorne instructed, apparently forgetting that all their communication equipment had been reduced to expensive paperweights. If anyone finds Turner or encounters trouble, fire 3 shots into the air. 3 shots. Into the air. In a forest where sound itself seemed to get lost and confused. But sure, that's a foolproof communication system. The northern team made it approximately 200 meters before the forest decided to have some fun with them. Wright was following what he thought were Turner's footprints, clear boot impressions in the soft earth, when he noticed something peculiar. "These tracks are leading in a circle," he announced, kneeling beside the trail. "But look at this, they're getting fresher as we go." That's because they weren't following Turner's path. They were following their own footprints from a timeline that hadn't happened yet. But try explaining temporal paradoxes to archaeologists who think carbon dating is cutting-edge technology. Thorne was more focused on the increasing density of crystal formations they were encountering. What had started as a single artifact near their campsite was becoming a regular feature of the landscape. Every few hundred meters they'd encounter another geometric structure, each one humming at a slightly different frequency. "There's definitely a pattern here," he observed, consulting his compass, which was now pointing toward magnetic north, magnetic south, and what appeared to be magnetic sideways, all simultaneously. "These formations are arranged in some kind of grid system." "Is a grid system?" "Exactly right. A containment grid designed to prevent anything inside from leaving. But I'm sure it was just coincidental geometric aesthetics." Meanwhile, the southern team was having their own adventures in impossibility. Kim's geological training was being challenged by rock formations that seemed to violate several fundamental laws of physics. Sedimentary layers were sitting on top of igneous intrusions that were somehow older than the metamorphic rock underneath them. "This stratigraphy makes no sense," she complained, examining a cliff face that appeared to show millions of years of geological history compressed into a few meters. "It's like someone took different time periods and just stacked them on top of each other." Someone. Something. Entities that exist outside linear time and think geology is more like interior decorating. But who's keeping track of minor details like temporal consistency? Vasquez was documenting plant species that shouldn't exist. Not just new species, but plants that seemed to combine characteristics from completely different evolutionary branches. Flowers with bark, trees with leaves that moved like tentacles, vines that grew in perfect mathematical spirals, despite the complete absence of any supporting structure. "The biodiversity here challenges everything we know about evolution," she said, photographing a moss that appeared to be photosynthetic, carnivorous and possibly sentient. "These species display traits that should be mutually exclusive." Should be. There's that human assumption that reality follows rules they understand. Sweet, naive optimism. Grant was getting increasingly disturbed by her photographs. Each image revealed more details that shouldn't be there: faces in the bark of trees, eyes hidden in the patterns of leaves, the shapes moving through the background that weren't visible when she'd taken the shots. "Something's watching us," she whispered, though her companions were too focused on their scientific observations to pay attention. "Every photo shows something different, but they're all watching." At 2:15 p.m. the southern team made contact with their first forest resident. They were examining a particularly bizarre crystal cluster when Kim heard breathing that wasn't coming from any of her teammates. Slow, deliberate inhalations and exhalations, like someone trying very hard to appear calm. "Turner?" she called out. "Alex, is that you?" The breathing stopped immediately. Then, from directly behind them, Turner's voice replied, "I'm here. Don't turn around." Now, most species would recognize this as a fairly obvious trap. The voice was coming from the wrong direction, had an odd, echoing quality, and was giving instructions that no legitimate rescue situation would require. But humans have this fascinating ability to hear what they want to hear. "Thank goodness," Vasquez exclaimed, starting to turn toward the voice. "I said don't turn around." Turner's voice snapped, with an urgency that finally registered as wrong. "Something's wrong with me." I can't control. That's when Grant made the mistake of looking at her latest photograph. The image showed all three women standing in the clearing, but behind them, where Turner's voice was coming from, was something that had Turner's general shape but was clearly not Turner. The proportions were off, the limbs too long, and the face was a shifting blur of features that couldn't decide what they wanted to be. "Run," she whispered to her teammates. "That's not Turner." "What do you mean it's not Turner?" Kim demanded. "He's right behind us." "Look at the photo," Grant insisted, holding up the image. The thing wearing Turner's voice laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass played backwards. Clever little photographer. Always seeing more than she should. Now they ran. Finally, some appropriate survival behavior from the human expedition. They crashed through the undergrowth, following no particular direction, except away from whatever had been pretending to be their missing teammate. Behind them, Turner's stolen voice called out in increasingly distorted tones, sometimes pleading, sometimes laughing, sometimes speaking in languages that predated human civilization. "Where are you going?" it called. "Don't you want to find your friend?" "He's right here with me. We're having such interesting conversations about human psychology." They ran for 20 minutes before realizing they were back at their original campsite, which should have been impossible since they'd been running in a straight line away from it. But the forest had its own ideas about geography. Even worse, Thorne and Wright were already there, looking confused and slightly panicked. "How did you get back here so fast?" Thorne demanded. "We just returned from the north, and you were nowhere near camp when we left." "We ran into something," Kim gasped, still trying to catch her breath. "Something pretending to be Turner." "That's impossible," Wright said automatically. Then he paused, probably remembering that they'd been encountering a lot of impossible things lately. "What do you mean, pretending?" Grant showed them the photograph. In the image, the thing behind them had become even more distorted, its features now obviously inhuman, its posture suggesting something that had never actually lived inside a human body. "We heard Turner too," Thorne admitted quietly, "north of here, calling for help. But when we tried to reach him, the voice kept moving further away. Like it was leading us somewhere." Leading them somewhere. Exactly. The forest was herding them, testing them, learning about human psychology and group dynamics. And they were providing an excellent education. "We need to leave," Kim announced, which was the most sensible thing anyone had said in 2 days. "Right now, whatever Turner encountered, it's not something we can handle with scientific equipment." But before they could organize their retreat, the forest made its final move. The crystal formations around their campsite began resonating in harmony, creating a frequency that made their bones ache and their vision blur. The air shimmered like heat waves, and suddenly they were no longer alone. Figures emerged from between the trees, dozens of them. Hundreds, maybe. All human in basic shape, but wrong in crucial details. Some were clearly previous expeditions explorers from different time periods, wearing clothes from eras spanning several centuries. Others appeared to be indigenous people, their features suggesting they'd been collected from various tribal groups over the years. But they all had the same expression, empty, waiting, like actors who'd forgotten their lines and were standing around hoping someone would tell them what to do next. "The collection is nearly complete," said a voice that seemed to come from all of them simultaneously. "You represent the final specimens we require for our study." Study? Of course. Humans weren't the first species to stumble into this trap, and they wouldn't be the last. But they were apparently the most entertaining, which counted for something. "What do you want from us?" Thorne demanded, because even facing interdimensional collectors, humans feel compelled to negotiate. Understanding, the collective voice replied, "Your species displays behaviors that confuse us. You encounter obvious danger and advance toward it. You ignore clear warnings and interpret threats as challenges. You sacrifice individual survival for abstract concepts like knowledge and discovery. We must understand why." "You're studying human curiosity?" Vasquez asked. apparently finding this concept fascinating even under the circumstances. Curiosity, bravery, stupidity. Your language has multiple terms for the same phenomenon. We collect examples to determine the underlying mechanisms. And there it was. Humans had stumbled into an alien research facility, and they were about to become permanent subjects in a study of human behavior. The ultimate irony: scientists studying them. But here's where it gets interesting. Because humans, even when faced with cosmic entities conducting behavioral experiments, don't just give up. They adapt. What if we could teach you about human behavior without becoming specimens? Grant suggested. We're already scientists. We understand research methodology. The collective voice paused, considering this proposal. Around them, the assembled figures tilted their heads in unison, like puppets controlled by the same strings. Explain, they said finally. You want to understand human curiosity and risk-taking behavior, Wright said, catching on to Grant's plan. But if you collect us, you lose the very qualities you're trying to study. Dead specimens can't demonstrate living behavior. We do not kill our subjects, the voice protested. They remain functional. Observe. One of the collected humans stepped forward. It was Turner, but his eyes were vacant, his movements mechanical. When he spoke, it was in the same collective voice as the others. I retain all memories and knowledge, he said. I can answer questions about human behavior patterns. I am an excellent research subject. But you're not human anymore, Kim said sadly. You're a recording, a copy without the spark that made you who you were. The entities seemed to find this concept troubling. The crystal formations dimmed slightly, their harmonious humming becoming discordant. The spark? They asked through Turner's mouth. Define this concept. Free will, Thorne said, independent thought. The ability to surprise ourselves. You can't study human behavior if you remove the humanity. We could establish a research partnership, Vasquez added. We document our own responses to various stimuli, explain our decision-making processes in real time. You get better data, we get to remain ourselves. The entities considered this proposal while the collected humans stood motionless, waiting for instruction. For several minutes, the only sound was the shifting harmonics of the crystal formations as they processed this unexpected development. Finally, the collective voice spoke again, though now it seemed to come only from Turner. This proposal has merit, but how do we trust that you will provide accurate data? Your species is known for deception when survival is threatened. Because Grant said, raising her camera, we're already documenting everything. Every decision, every reaction, every moment of terror and wonder. You want to understand human behavior? Here it is, recorded in real time. She began flipping through her photographs, showing image after image of their expedition. The moments of discovery, the growing unease, the terror, the problem-solving, the attempts to negotiate. A complete record of human psychology under stress. Fascinating, the voice admitted. These images show emotional states we had not observed in our collected specimens. That's because fear and wonder die when you remove free will, Wright explained. Living humans react authentically. Collected humans are just biological machines following programming. The entities spent another long moment processing this information. Then, gradually, the assembled figures began to step back into the forest. One by one, they faded into the shadows between the trees, leaving only Turner standing before them. We accept your proposal, the collective voice said through him. But understand this is a limited experiment. You will document your behavioral responses to various scenarios we design. If the data proves insufficient, we will revert to our previous methodology. What about Turner? Kim asked. Can you restore him? He volunteered to remain as our liaison, the voice replied, and for a moment Turner's expression became more natural, more recognizably human. It's okay, he said in his own voice. I can feel them in my head, but I'm still me, mostly. and someone needs to make sure they don't decide to start collecting people again. We will establish observation posts at regular intervals. The collective voice resumed control. Document your responses to the environmental anomalies, your problem-solving methodologies, your group dynamics under stress. In return, you may study our technology and record your findings. And we can leave? Thorne asked. When our research is complete, or when you have provided sufficient data to satisfy our curiosity about human behavior. So began the strangest research collaboration in human history. The team spent 3 more weeks in the forest, documenting everything. Their fear responses to supernatural phenomena, their adaptation strategies for impossible situations, their social structures under pressure, their individual reactions to cosmic-scale intelligence. Grant's photographs became an invaluable record of human psychology in extremis. Every image captured emotions and reactions that the entities had never observed in their collected specimens. Genuine human behavior, unfiltered by the removal of free will. Vasquez catalogued plant species that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, while Kim documented geological formations that seemed to be carved from crystallized time. Wright discovered architectural structures that predated human civilization by millions of years, and Thorne coordinated everything with the kind of methodical enthusiasm that had gotten them into this situation in the first place. The entities, for their part, proved to be surprisingly accommodating research partners. They provided translation devices that allowed communication across dimensional barriers, shared energy sources that powered equipment beyond human technology, and demonstrated phenomena that revolutionized human understanding of physics. "You know," Grant said one evening as they sat around a campfire that burned with flames from 7 different spectrums of light, "this isn't how I thought this expedition would go." Better than being collected, Kim pointed out, taking photographs of rock samples that existed in quantum superposition until observed. Much better, Turner agreed, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested he was speaking for more than just himself. "Though I have to say, human behavior is even more fascinating from this perspective. You people are absolutely insane, and that's apparently what makes you scientifically valuable." When they finally left the forest 6 weeks later, they carried with them enough scientific data to revolutionize multiple fields of study. But more importantly, they'd established humanity's first formal contact with genuinely alien intelligence. The entities kept their bargain. They released detailed behavioral studies of human psychology, contributed technological advances that improved human understanding of dimensional physics, and agreed to limit their future collection activities to volunteers who understood the full scope of what they were agreeing to. And Turner? He remained as humanity's first interdimensional ambassador, helping to translate between human thinking and cosmic intelligence that existed outside normal reality. Not bad for a species too stupid to recognize obvious danger. Though I still say they got lucky. Next time humans decide to ignore warning signs and walk into obviously lethal situations, they might encounter entities less interested in research partnerships and more focused on things like total annihilation or interdimensional conquest. But knowing humans, they'll probably volunteer for those expeditions too. Some things never change.